The dawn broke cold over Pine Ridge Valley, Montana territory. September 1885 painted the Rocky Mountains in shades of amber and shadow. On a hill behind the main house, a solitary figure knelt before two graves. The man's broad shoulders remained still as stone. His weathered hands, scarred from a decade of hard labor, rested on his thighs. He wore no coat, despite the mountain chill. Pain had made him numb to lesser discomforts. Nathan Stone was 35 years old. He looked older. 7 years of grief had carved deep lines around his eyes. His dark hair showed silver at the temples now, though whether from age or sorrow no one could say. The beard he wore was neatly trimmed, a habit from his army days that he maintained even in isolation. His frame stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, thick with muscle earned from turning wild land into prosperity. But all that strength meant nothing before 2 wooden markers. The first grave marker read, "Emily Stone, 1857 to 1878, beloved wife." The second smaller stone said only, "Baby Stone never born, but always loved." Nathan placed wildflowers on each grave. Yellow primrose for Emily, who had loved their color. White columbine for the child he never knew. His ritual complete, he sat back on his heels. The silence of the mountain morning pressed against his ears. 7 years. 7 winters of visiting this spot. 7 summers of talking to stones. "Still don't know how to do this without you, Em." His voice came rough, unused to speech. He lived alone in the big house down the slope. 12 men worked his ranch, but Nathan kept his distance. Friendship required a part of him that died in 1878. He gave his workers fair wages, decent housing, and nothing more of himself. Jacob Hayes, his foreman, was the closest thing Nathan had to a friend. But even Jacob knew the wall around Nathan's heart. "Built the new barn like you wanted. Got the irrigation system working. The herd's up to 300 head now." The graves offered no response. They never did. But Nathan came anyway. Every Sunday at dawn. Every anniversary. Every time the loneliness threatened to swallow him whole. He came and spoke to the woman who had believed in him when the world saw only a penniless former soldier with a dream too big for his empty pockets. Memory pulled him back. Winter 1878. The worst blizzard Montana had seen in 20 years. Emily, 8 months pregnant, glowing with life despite her swollen belly. Nathan had been working the south pasture repairing fences before the storm hit full force. He'd told her to stay inside, keep the fire burning, wait for him. But the baby had come early, and the storm had made travel impossible. And Doc Miller, the only physician within 60 miles, couldn't reach them through the snowdrifts. Nathan had delivered the baby himself. He'd done everything he'd seen the veterinarian do with difficult births among the cattle. He'd boiled water-torn sheets for bandages, prayed to a God he wasn't sure existed. The baby had been blue, silent. No amount of rubbing or pleading had brought breath to those tiny lungs. Emily had bled. Too much blood. Too fast. Her face had gone pale as the snow falling outside. She'd gripped his hand with surprising strength for someone dying. Her last words still echoed in his skull every night before sleep finally came. "Promise me you'll be happy again. Promise me, Nathan." He'd promised. Liars always promise the dying what they want to hear. Nathan had buried them together when the ground finally thawed that spring. He'd carved the markers himself, unable to afford a proper stone mason. Then he'd thrown himself into work, building, expanding, making the ranch successful enough that no one could say his wife had died poor, as if success could atone for failure, as if money could resurrect the dead. 7 years of penance. 7 years of an empty bed and a house too large for one man. He was wealthy now by any measure. 800 acres of prime Montana grazing land. A herd that grew larger each year. Contracts with buyers in Virginia City and Helena. He could have anything money could buy. Except the one thing he wanted. A family. Someone to share the burden of success. Someone to make the big house feel like a home instead of a monument to loss. Nathan stood knees protesting after the long kneel. The sun had climbed higher now. Down the slope, smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. His men would be eating breakfast, preparing for another day of work. He should join them, should review the day's tasks with Jacob, should check the new calves in the east pasture. But his feet carried him not toward the house but further up the hill, to a spot that overlooked the entire valley. From here he could see everything he'd built, barns and corrals, the irrigation channels that kept the pastures green even in dry years, the road leading east toward Timber Ridge, the nearest town 60 miles distant through mountain passes and river crossings. That road. How many times had he thought about riding it? Not for supplies or business, but for another reason. A reason that made him feel both foolish and desperate. A memory from 5 years past that refused to fade no matter how hard he worked to bury it. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his brooding. Nathan turned to see Jacob Hayes riding up the hill. The older man sat his horse well despite the wooden leg strapped to his left thigh. They'd served together in the Indian Wars of 1876. Jacob had lost his leg at Little Bighorn. Nathan had carried him 3 miles through hostile territory, both of them knowing the warrior bands could return at any moment. That kind of shared terror forged bonds deeper than friendship. It created family. "Figured I'd find you here," Jacob said, reining up beside Nathan. He didn't dismount. A man with one leg learned to stay mounted when possible. "Got trouble, boss." Nathan's jaw tightened. Trouble was the last thing he needed. "What kind?" "Surveyors, 5 of them, setting stakes along Boulder Creek." The creek marked the western boundary of Nathan's property, or it should have. The land from the creek eastward to the mountains belonged to him. He'd bought it from the federal government 10 years ago. He had the deed locked in his safe. No one should be surveying his land without permission. Clayton Ashford leading them. Jacob nodded. "How'd you know?" Nathan had met Clayton Ashford exactly once at a cattle auction in Virginia City 3 years ago. The man was young, maybe 30, dressed in expensive Eastern clothes that looked ridiculous in Montana territory. He'd tried to intimidate Nathan over a disputed bid. Nathan had simply outbid him and walked away with the bulls he wanted. Men like Clayton Ashford were used to getting their way through money or threats. They didn't know how to handle someone who refused to be intimidated. "The Ashfords have been buying up land all through this territory," Nathan said. "Rich family from Timber Ridge. Father made his fortune in mining and real estate. Son's trying to expand the empire." "Well, the son's on your land right now. Got paperwork claiming the creek corridor belongs to them." Nathan's hands curled into fists. He'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let some rich boy steal what was his. "Get the men ready. We're riding out." 20 minutes later, Nathan and 5 of his ranch hands approached Boulder Creek. The creek ran clear and cold, fed by mountain snowmelt. It provided essential water for Nathan's cattle during the dry summer months. Losing access to that creek would cripple his operation. Clayton Ashford stood beside the creek, watching his surveyors drive stakes into the ground. He wore a tailored suit, completely impractical for outdoor work. A gun belt hung at his waist, the holster containing what looked like an expensive Remington revolver. Probably never been fired, Nathan thought. Rich men wore guns like jewelry, not tools. "Stone," Clayton called out, his voice carrying false cheer. "Was hoping you'd show up. Wanted to discuss boundaries like civilized men." Nathan dismounted his boots, hitting the ground with deliberate weight. He walked forward, hands loose at his sides. His own Colt .45 sat comfortable on his hip. Unlike Clayton's pristine weapon, Nathan's showed wear from years of use. The grip was smooth from handling. The metal bore the patina of gunpowder residue and mountain weather. "You're on my land," Nathan said. No preamble, no pleasantries, just fact. Clayton smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I have documents from the Virginia City Land Office proving this corridor belongs to Ashford Holdings." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "See for yourself." Nathan took the document, his eyes scanning the legal language. The paper looked official. Government seals, signatures. A claim that the land from Boulder Creek westward for half a mile had been granted to Richard Ashford in 1870, 5 years before Nathan bought his property. But Nathan knew every inch of his deed. He'd memorized the boundary descriptions. This document was wrong. Whether through honest error or deliberate fraud, it contradicted the federal grant he'd received. "This is forged," Nathan said, handing back the paper. Clayton's smile vanished. "That's a serious accusation, Stone. You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling this paper fraudulent. I bought this land from the federal government in 1875. Got the original deed in my safe. Your paper here says the land was granted to your father in 1870. But the federal survey wasn't even completed until 1872. So either the government travels backward in time or someone backdated this document." Color rose in Clayton's face. "You've got a smart mouth for a dirt farmer. And you've got smart lawyers working on fake papers. Question is why? What's on this land that the Ashfords want so badly?" Clayton's hand drifted toward his gun. Nathan didn't move, but 5 men behind him shifted in their saddles. Jacob's hand rested casually on his rifle. The surveyors stopped working, sensing the tension. "I'd think real careful before you touch that iron," Nathan said quietly. "I don't want trouble, but I will defend what's mine." For a long moment the only sound was Boulder Creek's babble and the wind through the pines. Then Clayton's hand moved away from his gun. He smiled again, but this time it carried pure venom. "You're making a mistake, Stone. My family doesn't lose. We'll have this land, one way or another. Get off my property. Now!" Clayton gestured to his surveyors. They gathered their equipment quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. As they prepared to leave, Clayton turned back. "Heard you're a widower. Living alone in that big house. Must get lonely. Man needs companionship. Needs someone to carry on his legacy." He let the words hang there, loaded with implication. "Shame if something happened to you. All that land would just sit there. No heirs. Government might auction it off to settle your debts." The threat was barely veiled. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I've faced better men than you in fights that actually mattered. You want to try something, you go ahead. But remember, I'm still standing and they're not." Clayton mounted his horse, his men following suit. "We'll see each other again, Stone, real soon." They rode west, disappearing into the tree line. Nathan stood watching until they were gone, then turned to Jacob. "What do you think they're after?" Jacob spat tobacco juice into the creek. "Only thing worth fighting over around here is water or minerals. Creek's important, sure, but not worth forged documents and threats. Unless there's something else, something under the ground. Silver." Nathan had heard the rumors. Prospectors claimed to have found traces of silver in the mountains around Pine Ridge Valley. But none of the claims had panned out. Most gave up and moved on to richer strikes in other territories. Still, if the Ashfords had information about a significant deposit, "I'll ride into town tomorrow. Talk to Doc Miller. He's been here longer than anyone. If there's silver on this land, he'd know." That evening, Nathan made the ride to Doc Miller's cabin. The old physician lived 3 miles from Nathan's ranch, close enough to respond to emergencies, but far enough to maintain his solitude. Doc was pushing 70 now, his hands shaky from age and too much whiskey. But his mind remained sharp as ever. He'd been the one to deliver Emily when Nathan's mother couldn't. He'd tried to save Emily when Nathan's own hands failed. He was the closest thing to family Nathan had left. The cabin sat in a small clearing, smoke rising from its chimney. Nathan tied his horse and knocked. Doc's voice called from inside, rough and welcoming. "It's open." Nathan entered. The cabin consisted of one large room serving as kitchen sitting area and bedroom all at once. Medical books lined makeshift shelves. Bottles of various medications crowded the table. Doc himself sat by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Nathan, thought you might stop by. Heard about your trouble with the Ashfords." News traveled fast in Montana territory. "How'd you hear?" "Tom Wilson was in town buying supplies. Saw the whole thing. Said Clayton Ashford looked ready to draw on you." Doc poured a second glass of whiskey, holding it out. "You handled it right. Walking away from a fight ain't cowardice, it's wisdom." Nathan took the glass but didn't drink. He'd seen too many men find answers in bottles. "Doc, what do you know about silver deposits around Boulder Creek?" The old man's face went carefully neutral. "Why you asking?" "Clayton Ashford doesn't risk murder charges over water rights. He's after something bigger." Doc studied his whiskey for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets kept too long. "There have been rumors for years. Prospector named Dutch Henry claimed he found color along Boulder Creek back in '72. Said it was the richest strike he'd ever seen. But before he could file a claim, he disappeared. Most folks figured Indians got him, but some say it was claim jumpers. You believe that?" "I believe Dutch Henry knew something, and I believe powerful men don't like poor prospectors sitting on fortunes." Doc leaned forward. "If there is silver on your land, Nathan, you've got a target on your back. The Ashfords are ruthless. Richard Ashford's been buying up this territory for 20 years. Anyone who stands in his way tends to have accidents. I can handle myself. Against hired guns, against lawyers who can forge documents good enough to fool judges, you're one man, Nathan. They're an empire." Nathan set down his untouched whiskey. "I didn't build this ranch to give it up to thieves. Emily and I dreamed of this place. I'm not letting some rich man steal that dream because I'm afraid." Doc's expression softened. "Emily's been gone 7 years, son. Don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but that's a long time. You ever think about moving forward?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means you're 35 years old. You've got a successful ranch, good land money in the bank. You could have a life again, maybe even a family." Nathan stood uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I should get back." "Nathan," Doc's voice stopped him at the door. "You remember what Emily made you promise before she passed?" Of course he remembered. Every word was burned into his memory. "She made me promise to be happy." "Then honor that promise. Don't spend the rest of your life talking to gravestones." Nathan rode home through the gathering darkness, Doc's words echoing in his mind. The old man was right, he supposed. 7 years was long enough to mourn, but how did a man move forward when he couldn't imagine anyone filling the space Emily left behind, except he could imagine someone? One face that haunted him with what might have been. Back at the ranch house, Nathan lit a lamp and went to his study. The room smelled of leather and tobacco. He poured himself a drink this time, taking a long swallow. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside lay a handkerchief, delicate fabric embroidered with tiny roses. The stitching had faded over 5 years, but Nathan could still make out the pattern. He lifted it carefully, as if it might crumble at rough handling. 5 years ago, summer of 1880, he'd gone to Timber Ridge for supplies. The town held a weekly market where farmers and ranchers traded goods. Nathan had needed tools, nails, basic staples. He'd planned to conduct his business and return home by sunset. Then he'd heard the commotion. Near the livestock pens, a crowd had gathered. At its center stood a fat merchant named Jake Morrison, well known for shady dealings and inflated prices. Morrison was shouting red-faced with rage at an elderly man in tattered clothes. "Thief! You tried to steal my chicken!" The old man was crying, pleading in a thin voice. "I only touched it to see if it was healthy. I was going to make an offer." Morrison's accusations grew louder. He was putting on a show, Nathan realized. Intimidating customers, showing what happened to people who questioned his prices. The crowd watched, but no one intervened. Crossing Morrison meant trouble. Nathan had started forward, ready to defend the old man. Then someone beat him to it. A young woman stepped out of the crowd. She was tall for a woman, maybe 5'8", with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple, not the finery of a wealthy merchant's daughter. But she moved with purpose, shoulders back, chin high. She inserted herself between Morrison and the old man. "Stop this immediately!" Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Morrison, caught off guard, actually stopped shouting for a moment. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's been watching your stall for the past 10 minutes. This gentleman touched the chicken for 3 seconds. He asked the price. When you told him $2, he thanked you and walked away. He didn't try to take anything." The crowd murmured agreement. Several people nodded, confirming her account. Morrison's face went from red to purple. "You calling me a liar, girl?" "I'm stating what I observed." She pulled a small purse from her dress. "How much is the chicken?" $2. Here's $2. She counted out the coins, placing them in Morrison's palm. The chicken is now mine. She turned to the old man holding out the bird. For you, sir, for your family. The old man stared at her, tears streaming down his weathered face. I can't accept this, miss. You don't know me. I don't need to know you to know you're honest. She smiled then. The expression transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. And that you have a family waiting for you at home. While the old man walked away, clutching the chicken like treasure, Nathan had watched the young woman. Really watched her. Two other young women approached, clearly her sisters, based on their similar features. But where they were polished and refined, this woman seemed carved from rougher stone. Her hands showed calluses. Her skin bore the tan of someone who spent time outdoors. She didn't carry herself like a lady who expected doors opened and chairs pulled out. She walked like someone used to opening her own doors and fighting her own battles. Maggie, what have you done? The older sister hissed. Father will be furious. Then I'll explain it to him, Maggie replied, calm as morning water. You spent the family's money on a stranger. I spent my own money doing what was right. The sisters had dragged her away, their complaints fading into the market noise. But Nathan had stood frozen, his errands forgotten. He'd just witnessed something rare in a world where most people looked away from trouble. True courage, compassion without expectation of reward. The kind of character Emily had possessed. He'd asked around town after that. Learned the sisters were the Ashford daughters. The two older ones, Victoria and Catherine, were known for their beauty and refinement. The youngest, Margaret, called Maggie, was considered problematic. Some described her as stubborn and difficult. Others, particularly the poorer folk, spoke of her with gratitude and admiration. She had a reputation for standing up to injustice, even when it cost her, especially when it cost her. Nathan had planned to introduce himself, maybe invite her for coffee, learn more about the woman brave enough to confront bullies. But life had intervened. A week later, Emily discovered she was pregnant. All thoughts of Maggie Ashford had been pushed aside by the joy and terror of impending fatherhood. Then Emily died, and Nathan stopped thinking about anything except survival. But he'd kept the handkerchief. Maggie had dropped it during the confrontation with Morrison. Nathan had picked it up, meaning to return it. Instead, he'd carried it home and locked it in his desk drawer. A reminder that goodness still existed in the world, even when his own world had gone dark. Now, 5 years later, Nathan sat in his study holding that faded handkerchief. Doc Miller's words rang in his ears. Clayton Ashford's threats echoed in his memory. The empty house pressed down on him like a physical weight. Maybe it was time to stop mourning. Maybe it was time to honor Emily's final request and try, however imperfectly, to find happiness again. Nathan pulled out a sheet of paper. He'd never been good with words. Give him a fence to mend or a horse to break, and he knew exactly what to do. But expressing feelings on paper felt like trying to rope smoke. Still, he had to try. He wrote the date at the top, September 15, 1885. Then he began. The letter took 2 hours and a dozen false starts. Nathan wrote and crossed out, began again, struggled with every sentence. How did a man ask to court a woman he'd met once 5 years ago? How did he explain that her simple act of kindness had lodged in his memory like a splinter he couldn't remove? In the end, he kept it simple, direct, honest. Dear Mr. Richard Ashford, I am Nathan Stone, owner of Stone Ranch in Pine Ridge Valley, Montana Territory. I write to request permission to court your daughter. I am 35 years old, a widower of 7 years with no children. I own 800 acres of land, 300 head of cattle, and assets valued at approximately $50,000. I have no debts and maintain a good reputation in this community. I seek to court Miss Margaret Ashford, your youngest daughter. I met her 5 years ago at the Timber Ridge Market. Though our meeting was brief, her character made a lasting impression. I have not forgotten her courage and compassion. I understand this is an unusual request. I am willing to provide any additional information you require regarding my circumstances and intentions. If you consent, I would welcome Miss Margaret to my ranch so that we might become acquainted properly before any formal engagement. Respectfully, Nathan Stone. He read it over 3 times, looking for errors or presumption. The letter was formal, perhaps too formal, but anything less might seem disrespectful. He folded the paper, sealed it with wax, and addressed it to Richard Ashford, Timber Ridge, Montana Territory. Jacob found him the next morning saddling his horse before dawn. "Where you headed, boss?" "Town. Need to post a letter." Jacob studied Nathan's face in the dim light of the stable. "Must be an important letter. You never ride to town before breakfast." "Just something I should have done years ago." "This got anything to do with what Doc Miller said last night?" Nathan cinched the saddle tight, checking the straps twice. "Maybe." "Good." Jacob's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "About damn time you stopped living like a ghost." Nathan rode the 60 miles to Timber Ridge, posted his letter at the general store, and rode home the same day. 120 miles in saddle left him exhausted. But for the first time in 7 years, Nathan felt something other than grief or determination. He felt the faint, terrifying flutter of hope. In Timber Ridge, 3 days later, Richard Ashford sat in his study reading Nathan Stone's letter for the 3rd time. His wife Eleanor stood nearby, her face twisted in that particular expression of cruel delight she wore when life presented opportunities for mischief. "He wants Maggie," she said, as if repeating the fact made it more absurd. "Of all our daughters, he specifically requests our problem child." Richard tapped the letter against his desk. "Nathan Stone, owner of the land near Boulder Creek, the same land Clayton tried to claim yesterday. You think he knows about the silver? If he did, he wouldn't be writing courtship letters. He'd be hiring guards and lawyers." Richard stood pacing to the window. "This is perfect. Almost too perfect." "I don't understand." "Think Eleanor. Clayton's surveyors confirmed it yesterday. There's silver under that creek corridor, enough to make us wealthier than half the territory combined. But Stone refuses to sell. He threatened Clayton with violence. So we find another way to take the land." "Exactly, and Nathan Stone just handed us that way." Richard held up the letter. "He wants to marry Maggie, our disobedient, ungrateful, problematic daughter, the same daughter who's cost us thousands with her righteous crusades against corruption." Understanding dawned on Eleanor's face. If she marries Stone, she becomes his legal wife, and if something happened to him, his property would pass to his widow, who happens to be our daughter, who we control. Maggie hates us. She'd never cooperate. She won't know she's cooperating. We'll present this as a genuine courtship. Maggie's desperate to escape this house. She'll jump at the chance to leave. Once she's married to Stone, we arrange an accident. Nothing traceable, just another unfortunate incident in a dangerous territory. Eleanor moved closer, her voice dropping. "And if Maggie suspects, what can she do? Report her own father? She has no proof. And by the time she figures it out, Stone will be dead and the land will be ours." Richard smiled. "We send her away thinking we're punishing her. We're actually giving her exactly what she wants, freedom from us, a new life. She'll never know she's the weapon we used to kill her husband." "What about Clayton?" "Clayton will handle the actual arrangements. He's eager to prove himself. Let him prove it by eliminating our obstacle." Richard summoned his son that evening. Clayton arrived still nursing wounded pride from his confrontation with Nathan. The bruise to his ego showed in every stiff movement, every tight expression. "I have a job for you," Richard said without preamble. "Nathan Stone is going to marry your sister Maggie." Clayton's confusion was almost comical. "What? Why would he want Maggie?" "Doesn't matter why. What matters is this gives us an opportunity. Once they're married, Stone will be isolated with a wife he barely knows, a wife whose family has significant influence over her despite her rebellious tendencies. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Clayton's eyes widened, then narrowed. "An accident. A tragic accident. Perhaps a fall from a horse. Maybe a confrontation with claim jumpers that goes wrong. I don't care about the details. I care about the result. Nathan Stone dead, his property passing to his widow, and his widow under our control. And if Maggie refuses to cooperate, we don't give her the choice. We send her to Stone. We encourage the marriage. We wait until the time is right. Then you do what needs to be done." Clayton nodded slowly. "When do we tell her?" "Tomorrow night at dinner. Make it seem like a fortunate opportunity. Don't let her suspect this is anything but a legitimate courtship." But Maggie already suspected, because Maggie had been standing outside her father's study window, listening through the gap beneath the sill, hearing every word of their plan. She stood in the garden now, her back pressed against the cold stone wall, hand over her mouth to muffle any sound. Inside, her father and brother were plotting murder, using her as the instrument, sending her to marry a man they intended to kill. Terror and rage warred in Maggie's chest. 24 years she'd endured this family's cruelty. 24 years of being called problematic, difficult, unwanted. But this transcended simple cruelty. This was evil. She had to warn Nathan Stone, had to tell him about the plot. Even if he rejected her afterward, even if he sent her away in disgust, she couldn't let an innocent man die because her family wanted his land. But how could she warn him? If she ran away tonight, they'd hunt her down before she reached Pine Ridge. If she stayed and tried to send a message, they might intercept it. The only way to warn Nathan was to go to him, accept the courtship, use their own plan against them. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal. If they discovered, she knew they'd kill her too. But Maggie had spent her whole life standing up for what was right. She couldn't stop now just because the stakes had grown higher. Tomorrow night at dinner, she would accept their proposal. She would play the grateful daughter, the dutiful woman, eager for a chance at marriage. She would go to Nathan Stone's ranch, and then she would tell him everything. If he was the man people said he was, the honorable former soldier who'd built a ranch through honest work, then maybe he'd help her. Maybe together they could survive whatever Clayton had planned. And if he wasn't, if Nathan Stone proved to be as bad as her family, then at least she'd tried. At least she'd fought. Maggie Ashford had never surrendered to injustice in her life. She wasn't starting now. Dinner the following evening was a theatrical production. The family gathered in the formal dining room, a space used only for important occasions. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished silverware. The meal itself was elaborate, far beyond their usual fare. Richard had ordered the cook to prepare a feast. Maggie sat at her usual place between her sisters Victoria and Catherine. Her grandmother Helen, confined to bed upstairs with illness, was absent. Maggie wished the old woman could be here. Grandmother Helen was the only member of the family who'd ever shown her genuine love. Margaret. Richard began using her full name like he did when playing the concerned father. "We have wonderful news." Maggie arranged her face into an expression of polite curiosity. "Yes, Father. We've received a proposal of courtship from a very successful rancher in Pine Ridge Valley, a Mr. Nathan Stone." Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "Nathan Stone, the war veteran who owns that enormous ranch." "The same," Eleanor confirmed. "He's requested permission to court Margaret." Catherine laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. "He wants to court Maggie. Has he met her?" "Apparently they encountered each other 5 years ago at the market. He was impressed by her character." The way Richard said character made it clear he found the notion absurd, as if Maggie's principles were a flaw rather than a virtue. "What do you think, Margaret?" Richard asked. "Would you like to meet Mr. Stone? Perhaps spend some time at his ranch becoming acquainted?" This was the moment. Maggie knew her response had to be perfect. Too eager, and they'd suspect. Too reluctant, and they might withdraw the offer. "I'd like to know more about him," she said carefully. "His character, his expectations. I won't agree to marry a man I don't know." "Of course not," Richard agreed smoothly. "That's why we're suggesting a visit first. You'd stay at his ranch for several weeks. If you suit each other, a formal engagement could follow. If not, you return home with no obligation." Liar. The word screamed in Maggie's head. She knew exactly how this would unfold. They'd push her toward marriage as quickly as possible. Once the wedding occurred, Clayton would arrange Nathan's death. The beautiful lies her father told now would dissolve like morning mist. "When would I leave?" she asked. "Monday next. That gives you time to prepare." 5 days. Maggie's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Then I accept. Thank you, Father, for this opportunity. Richard's smile was pure satisfaction. Eleanor looked triumphant. Victoria and Catherine exchanged glances that promised later ridicule. None of them knew Maggie had overheard their plot. None of them suspected their weapon had chosen to become their enemy. After dinner, Maggie went to her grandmother's room. Helen Ashford lay in a large 4-poster bed, her frail body barely making a dent in the mattress. At 76, illness had ravaged her once strong frame, but her eyes remained sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. "Come here, child," Helen whispered. Maggie sat on the bed's edge, taking her grandmother's papery hand in her own. "You heard them, didn't you?" Helen asked. "Through the study window?" Maggie's eyes went wide. "How did you know?" "Because I know you, and I know them. They're sending you away to that rancher." "Yes." "And you're going—" "I have to warn him, grandmother. They're going to kill him to steal his land. I can't let that happen." Helen squeezed Maggie's hand with surprising strength. "You're so much like your grandfather. He always chose the hard right over the easy wrong, even when it cost him." Her eyes grew misty. "It got him killed, you know, standing up to the wrong people." "I didn't know that." "Your father doesn't speak of it. Bad for business having a father who died fighting corruption instead of profiting from it." Helen reached under her pillow, pulling out a leather pouch. "Take this." Inside the pouch, coins clinked. Maggie opened it to find a mixture of silver dollars and gold eagles. More money than she'd ever held at once. "Grandmother, I can't take your savings." "You can, and you will. $300. Enough to run if you need to. Enough to start over somewhere they'll never find you." Helen's grip tightened. "Promise me something, Margaret. If that rancher is a good man, you hold on to him. But if he's not, if you sense any danger, you take this money and you run. Don't come back here. Don't look back. Just run and live." Tears burned Maggie's eyes. "You're the only one who ever loved me." "That's not true. You just haven't met the others yet." Helen pulled Maggie down, kissing her forehead. "Go with God, child. And remember, true strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up every time you do." The 5 days before departure passed in a blur. Maggie packed her trunk with practical clothes, ignoring her mother's suggestion of fancier dresses. She included books, her journal, and her most precious possession, a small painting of Grandmother Helen from 30 years ago when the old woman still smiled freely. More importantly, Maggie included items her family would never approve of. She stole her father's spare pistol, a Remington .44, from his study safe. She knew the combination because she'd watched him open it dozens of times. The gun was heavy cold metal that spoke of violence Maggie hoped she'd never need to employ. But if Clayton came after Nathan, she wanted to be armed. She packed 20 rounds of ammunition, a hunting knife small enough to hide in her boot, and a detailed map of Montana Territory. If everything went wrong, if Nathan refused to help or proved untrustworthy, she'd use Grandmother Helen's money to flee west. California, maybe. Or north into Canada. Somewhere the Ashford reach didn't extend. Sarah, the family's longtime housekeeper, found Maggie packing the pistol. The older woman said nothing, just quietly brought extra ammunition and showed Maggie how to hide the gun in a specially sewn pocket inside her traveling coat. "I've worked for this family 20 years, Sarah said. "I've seen what they do to people who cross them. You're the only good soul in this house, Miss Maggie. Whatever you're planning, I pray it works." Monday morning arrived gray and cold. A hired coach waited in the circular drive, its driver a weathered man named Henry Collins. Richard paid him in advance, instructing him to deliver Maggie safely to Stone Ranch. The family gathered for farewell. Richard kissed Maggie's cheek, the gesture mechanical and false. "Have a wonderful journey, daughter. We hope you'll be very happy." Eleanor didn't bother with physical affection. "Right when you arrive." Victoria and Catherine stood on the porch, their smiles too bright. They'd spent the past 5 days making cruel jokes about Maggie's upcoming marriage to a man who supposedly couldn't find a better bride. The jokes had bounced off Maggie like rain off stone. Let them laugh. They had no idea what she knew or what she planned, Only Sarah showed genuine emotion. The housekeeper hugged Maggie tightly, whispering, "Be safe, child, and don't trust anyone easily." At the last moment before entering the coach, Maggie looked up at her grandmother's second-floor window. Helen stood there, one hand pressed against the glass. Even from this distance, Maggie could see tears on the old woman's face. She raised her own hand in farewell, knowing she'd likely never see Grandmother Helen alive again. Then she climbed into the coach, and the door closed behind her with the finality of a cell door slamming shut. The journey to Pine Ridge Valley would take 6 hours, covering 60 miles of rough mountain roads. Henry Collins proved to be a taciturn but competent driver. He asked no questions about why a young woman was traveling alone to a stranger's ranch. In Montana Territory, people minded their own business. It was safer that way. 3 hours into the journey, Maggie noticed the rider. He stayed about 200 yards behind, matching their pace, but never closing the distance. A man on a bay horse wearing a long coat despite the day's warmth. He made no effort to hide himself, which meant he wanted to be seen. "Mr. Collins," Maggie called through the coach's front window. "We're being followed." Henry glanced back, his expression unchanging. "Noticed him an hour ago. Don't worry, miss. He ain't trying to catch us, just keeping track. You know who he is. Jack Morrison. Works for the Ashfords sometimes. Does jobs most folks won't touch." So Clayton had sent a spy to ensure she reached Nathan's ranch. Or perhaps Jack Morrison had orders beyond simple surveillance. If Maggie tried to run, would he stop her? Kill her report. Back to Clayton. Maggie's hand slipped into her coat pocket, feeling the weight of the Remington. If Morrison tried anything, she'd defend herself. She'd learned to shoot by sneaking into the woods with her father's rifle when she was 14. Richard Ashford believed women shouldn't handle weapons, but Maggie had recognized even then that the world was dangerous, especially for women. She'd taught herself to load, aim, and fire. She wasn't an expert marksman, but at close range she could hit what she aimed at. The miles passed slowly. Mountain scenery rolled by, beautiful and indifferent to human concerns. Pine forests gave way to meadows which surrendered to rocky slopes which opened onto more forests. The land here felt wild in ways that Timber Ridge never did. This was frontier territory where law existed more in theory than practice, where strength and will determined survival more than money or family name. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the landscape changed again. The road descended into a valley broad and green with a clear river running through its heart. In the distance, Maggie could see buildings, barns, corrals, a large 2-story house built from logs and stone. "Stone Ranch," Henry announced. "We're here, miss." Maggie's heart began to hammer. This was it, the moment where everything changed. In minutes, she'd meet Nathan Stone. She'd have to find a way to warn him about Clayton's plot. She'd have to convince a complete stranger that his life was in danger from a family that wanted his land. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was part of the plot sent to trick him somehow? What if he was the kind of man who wouldn't listen to a woman's warnings? The coach rolled to a stop in front of the main house. The building was impressive, clearly constructed by someone who knew both carpentry and architecture. 2 stories of notched logs chinked tight against winter winds. A wide porch wrapped around 3 sides. Large windows suggested the interior would be bright and airy. Smoke rose from twin chimneys. The front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch. Nathan Stone was tall, easily 6 feet 2 inches, with shoulders that spoke of years handling heavy labor. He wore work clothes, flannel shirt, and denim trousers, both clean but showing age and wear. Dark hair graying at the temples, a beard neatly trimmed. But it was his eyes that captured Maggie's attention. Brown eyes, deep and watchful. Sad eyes. Eyes that had seen things he wished he could forget. He descended the porch steps as Henry opened the coach door. Maggie stepped out, her legs unsteady after 6 hours of travel. She smoothed her dress, suddenly aware of the dust coating her hem and the wisps of hair that had escaped her braid. Nathan stopped a respectful distance away. When he spoke, his voice was deep, roughened by infrequent use. "Miss Ashford, welcome to Stone Ranch." "Mr. Stone, thank you for inviting me." For a moment they simply looked at each other. Maggie saw recognition flicker in Nathan's eyes. He remembered her. From the market 5 years ago. He'd been there watching. The realization sent a strange warmth through her chest. "You must be tired from the journey," Nathan continued. "Let me show you to your room. We can talk after you've had a chance to rest." "Actually, Mr. Stone, I need to speak with you now. It's urgent." His expression shifted, becoming more alert. "Is something wrong?" "Yes, very wrong. But we need privacy. Please." Nathan glanced at Henry Collins, who was unloading Maggie's trunk from the coach's rear. Then he nodded. "Come inside." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and built-in bookshelves filled with volumes. Everything was clean and well-maintained, though Maggie noticed the touches that marked a bachelor's home. No curtains on the windows, no decorative items. Functional rather than welcoming. Nathan gestured to a chair. Maggie sat, then immediately stood again. She was too nervous to sit still. "Would you like coffee?" Nathan offered. "Or water?" "Mr. Stone, I need to tell you something you won't want to hear, but you have to believe me because your life depends on it." Nathan's hand moved instinctively toward the gun on his hip. He stopped the motion halfway, forcing himself to relax. "Go on." Maggie took a deep breath. This was the moment. Either Nathan Stone was the man she hoped he was, or this entire journey had been for nothing. "My family didn't send me here because they want me to marry you. They sent me here to be a weapon. They're planning to kill you, Mr. Stone. Once we're married, my brother Clayton will arrange an accident. Something that looks natural but isn't. They want your land. There's silver on it. Enough silver that my father is willing to commit murder to get it." Silence filled the room. Nathan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Maggie's pulse thundered in her ears. He was going to throw her out, going to call her a liar, going to send her back to her family where Clayton would discover she'd betrayed them. Then Nathan spoke, and his words were not what Maggie expected. "I know." Maggie's confusion must have shown on her face because Nathan's expression softened slightly. He gestured again toward the chair. This time she sat her legs, suddenly weak. "You know," she repeated. "How could you possibly know?" Nathan moved to a cabinet against the far wall, opening it to reveal a collection of glasses and a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a glass and brought it to her. Maggie accepted it with trembling hands. "Your brother Clayton came here last week," Nathan explained, "with surveyors and forged documents claiming this land belongs to your family. When I challenged him, he threatened me, told me accidents happen to stubborn men." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I've been threatened before, Miss Ashford, usually by better men than your brother. I know what a death threat sounds like." "Then why did you still send for me? If you knew my family wanted you dead, why invite their daughter into your home?" "Because I didn't think you were part of it. 5 years ago at that market I saw who you really are. A woman willing to spend her own money defending a stranger. That's not someone who participates in murder plots." He studied her face. "And judging by the terror in your eyes right now, I was correct. You're not here to help them. You're here to warn me." Relief flooded through Maggie so powerfully she had to grip the chair arms to stay upright. "You believe me?" "I believe you. The question is what we do now." Maggie set down the untouched whiskey. Her hands had steadied. Knowing Nathan believed her, knowing she wasn't alone, restored her composure. "I overheard my father and brother 3 nights ago. They think I don't know about their plan. They expect me to be their unwitting weapon. We could use that." "How?" "I go through with the courtship. We let them think everything is proceeding according to their design. Meanwhile, we prepare for whatever Clayton has planned. When he makes his move, we're ready." Nathan crossed to the window, looking out at the valley stretching below his ranch. The sun hung low now, painting everything in shades of copper and shadow. "That puts you in danger. If they discover you warned me, your father won't hesitate to eliminate you too." "I know, but it's the only way. If I run now, they'll just find another method to get your land, and they'll hunt me down for betraying them. At least here we face them together." "Together." Nathan turned back to face her. "You're proposing we actually marry, make this alliance real." "Yes, A marriage of strategy, not romance. You need someone watching your back. I need protection from my family. It's practical. Practical. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or sadness. Miss Ashford, I should tell you something. I didn't request your hand in marriage purely for practical reasons. Maggie's heart skipped. What do you mean? I was at that market 5 years ago. I saw what you did for that old man. I was going to intervene myself, but you beat me to it. I watched you stand up to Morris and spend your money without hesitation, ignore your sister's complaints. You reminded me of, he paused, of someone I loved very much, someone I lost. Your wife. Nathan nodded. Emily died 7 years ago. Her and our baby. I've been alone since then, told myself I was fine with solitude. But the truth is, I've been waiting, hoping to find someone who could make me believe in possibilities again. When I saw you at that market, I thought maybe. Then life got complicated, and I never acted on it. Until now. Maggie stood, moving closer to him. Mr. Stone, I won't pretend to understand what you've lost, but I do understand loneliness. I've spent my whole life in a family that treats me like a defect, a problem to be managed or disposed of. If we do this, if we marry, I need to know it's real, not a business arrangement, not a strategic alliance, real. What are you asking? I'm asking if you can imagine loving me, not immediately, not because you have to, but eventually, because I won't marry another man who sees me as useful rather than wanted. Nathan reached out his calloused hand, gentle as it cupped her face. Miss Maggie Ashford, I've imagined nothing else for 5 years. I just never thought I'd get the chance to find out if reality matched memory. Then we have a deal. We court properly. We prepare for whatever Clayton brings, and when the dust settles, we see if this partnership can become something more. Nathan's thumb brushed across her cheek. Deal. But you should know I don't do anything halfway. If we're going to prepare for war, we're going to do it right, starting tomorrow morning at dawn. The next morning arrived cold and gray. Nathan knocked on Maggie's door while stars still dusted the sky. She emerged already dressed in practical clothes, her hair braided for work rather than styled for appearance. You're awake, Nathan observed. I grew up in a household where sleeping late meant missing breakfast and facing my mother's disapproval. I learned to wake early. Maggie pulled on her coat. What's first? First, we ride the property line. 800 acres is a lot of ground. You need to know every inch of it, where the weak points are, where someone could infiltrate without being seen, where we have natural advantages. They saddled horses in the pre-dawn darkness. Nathan's mount was a large buckskin gelding named Copper, 16 hands of muscle and steadiness. He'd given Maggie a smaller mare, a paint named Juniper, who had gentle eyes and steady nerves. You know how to ride? Nathan asked as Maggie swung into the saddle with practiced ease. My father forbade me from learning properly, said it wasn't ladylike, so naturally I taught myself every chance I got. She gathered the reins. I'm not an expert, but I won't fall off. They rode east first toward the rising sun. The land rolled beneath them, alternating between meadow and forest. Nathan pointed out features as they traveled. The creek that provided water for his cattle. The meadow where he planned to plant hay next spring. The rocky outcropping that marked his eastern boundary. This property runs 6 miles north to south, about 1.5 miles east to west, Nathan explained. Total perimeter is roughly 15 miles. One man can't patrol that alone, can't even keep watch on all the approaches. So we need a system, something that alerts us to intruders. Already have one partially. See those trees? He indicated a line of pines about 200 yards ahead. I've strung bells on thin wire between them. Anyone riding through trips the wire and the bells ring. But there are gaps, places I haven't covered yet. They spent the morning identifying those gaps. Maggie proved to have a sharp eye for terrain. She spotted natural choke points where ambushers could wait. She noted areas where the tree line provided cover for approaching raiders. More than once, she suggested solutions that made Nathan reassess his own defenses. The North Canyon, she said as they surveyed a narrow ravine. That's your most vulnerable point. Someone could ride through there at night, get within a quarter-mile of your house without being detected." "I know. Been trying to figure out how to cover it. Can't build a wall. Can't post a man there permanently." "You don't need a wall. You need an early warning." Maggie dismounted, examining the canyon entrance. "We could set up a tripwire here, not to stop them, just to create noise. Tin cans on a rope. Anyone riding through in darkness would trip, it'd make a racket. That gives you time to respond." Nathan nodded slowly. "Simple but effective. Where'd you learn this kind of thinking?" "Books mostly. My father has an extensive library. He never noticed when I borrowed his military strategy texts. I read everything from Caesar's campaigns to reports from your Civil War. I figured knowledge couldn't hurt even if I never had chance to use it." "Well, you're using it now, and you're good at it." They continued the circuit, eventually returning to the house around noon. Jacob Hayes waited for them along with several of the ranch hands. The foreman's wooden leg made a distinctive sound as he walked, a reminder of battles fought and survived. "Boss got the men ready like you asked," Jacob said. "They're curious why you called this meeting." Nathan glanced at Maggie. She gave a small nod. They'd discussed this. The men needed to know about the threat. Secrets created vulnerabilities. Honesty built loyalty. "Boys, gather round," Nathan called. The 12 ranch hands assembled, a mix of ages and backgrounds. Some were young, barely 20. Others were grizzled veterans like Jacob, men who'd seen hard times and harder choices. All of them watched Nathan with respect and attention. "You all know Miss Maggie Ashford," Nathan began. "What you don't know is that her family has plans for this ranch, plans that involve taking it by force. There's silver on this land, enough to make men kill. The Ashfords aim to do exactly that." Murmurs rippled through the group. Nathan raised a hand for silence. "Miss Maggie came here to warn me. She could have stayed quiet, played along, kept herself safe. Instead, she risked everything to do what's right. That kind of courage deserves our respect and our protection. She's going to marry me, and anyone who threatens her answers to all of us." The men absorbed this information. Then Tom Wilson, a young hand who'd worked the ranch for 2 years, spoke up. "We're with you, boss. You gave us jobs when no one else would. You pay fair wages, treat us like men instead of animals. If someone's coming for this ranch, they go through us first." Agreement echoed from the others. Jacob stepped forward, his weathered face serious. "How long we got to prepare?" "Don't know for certain. Could be days, could be weeks. But they'll come. Count on it." The rest of that day passed in a blur of activity. Nathan took Maggie to meet each of the ranch hands individually, learning their skills and backgrounds. She listened carefully, asking questions that showed genuine interest. By evening, she'd memorized all 12 names and most of their stories. That night, after a simple dinner of beef stew and bread, Nathan led Maggie to Boulder Creek. The silver light of a half-moon reflected off the water's surface, creating an illusion of mercury flowing through the valley. "This is why they want the land," Nathan said. "Not just for the water, though that's valuable, for what's under the water." He showed her the rock face beside the creek. Even in moonlight, Maggie could see the mineral veins running through the stone. Silver, she realized. Raw silver ore exposed by centuries of water erosion. "How much is here?" she asked. "Doc Miller thinks maybe $2 million worth, maybe more, enough that the Ashfords would kill a dozen men to get it, let alone one." Maggie reached out, touching the cold stone. "And what will you do with it when this is over and you've won?" "Haven't decided. Part of me wants to mine it, use the money to expand the ranch, maybe buy more land. But another part thinks this territory needs things money can build, schools, a real hospital, maybe a library. Emily always said wealth without purpose was just hoarding. Your wife was wise. She was, and kind, and patient with a fool soldier who thought he could tame wilderness." Nathan's voice roughened. "I failed her, Miss Maggie. When she needed me most, I couldn't save her, couldn't save our baby. I've carried that guilt for 7 years. Maggie took his hand, surprised by her own boldness. "You didn't fail her. You fought for her. That's all anyone can do, fight and hope it's enough." They stood there in the moonlight, hands clasped, while the creek sang its eternal song. Something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but the recognition that love might be possible, that two wounded people might heal together if given time. The following week passed in intensive preparation. Nathan and Maggie, working with Jacob, transformed the ranch into a fortress. They strung more warning bells along the northern approach. They built improvised barricades using hay bales and lumber, creating defensive positions near the main house and barn. They stockpiled ammunition, water, and medical supplies. Maggie proved invaluable. Her quick mind identified problems Nathan had overlooked. Her willingness to work alongside the men hauling timber and digging trenches earned their respect. She learned to shoot a Winchester rifle, spending hours each afternoon practicing until she could hit targets at 100 yards. Nathan watched her progress with growing admiration. This was no pampered society woman. This was a warrior learning to fight. On the third night, they sat together on the porch after supper. The ranch had quieted. Men were in the bunkhouse, tired from the day's labor. Stars blazed overhead in that particular way they did in mountain country, so numerous they seemed to touch each other. "Tell me about her," Maggie said quietly. "About Emily. I should know." Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then he began to speak, words coming slowly at first, then faster as memory took hold. "We met when I was 25, just out of the army, trying to figure out what to do with myself. She was working at her father's general store in Helena, pretty as morning sunshine. But that wasn't what caught me. It was her laugh. She had this laugh that made everything seem possible, even when it wasn't." He described their courtship, how Emily had believed in his crazy dream of building a ranch from nothing, how she'd married him despite her father's objections, choosing love over comfort, how they'd worked side by side, building the first cabin together, dreaming of the family they'd raise. "She made me better than I was," Nathan said. "Made me think beyond just surviving. She talked about building a community here, a place where people looked after each other. That's why I treat my men fair, why I pay them well, because Emily would have wanted it that way. You must miss her terribly. Every day. But lately the missing hurts less. Maybe time really does heal. Or maybe—" He looked at Maggie. "Maybe it's finding someone who makes you want to look forward instead of back." Maggie's breath caught. "Nathan? I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I need you to understand something, Miss Maggie Ashford. This isn't just strategy for me. It hasn't been since the moment you stepped out of that coach. You're brave and smart, and you make me feel alive in ways I thought were gone forever. So yes, I can imagine loving you. Hell, I'm halfway there already." Before Maggie could respond, Nathan stood abruptly. "I shouldn't have said that. Too much, too fast." Maggie rose, moving to stand directly in front of him. "Nathan Stone, look at me." He did. In the starlight, her eyes reflected something he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I've spent my whole life being told I was too much. Too loud, too stubborn, too moral, too inconvenient. No one ever said I was enough just as I am. Until you." She placed her hand over his heart. "So don't apologize for too much. Give me too much. Give me everything, because that's what I want to give you." Nathan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like she was something precious that might shatter. Maggie pressed her face into his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her cheek. They stood that way for a long time, two people learning what it meant to be not alone. The peaceful routine shattered on the seventh day. A rider came at dawn, moving fast enough to raise dust. Jacob intercepted him before he reached the house. Nathan and Maggie were eating breakfast when the foreman knocked sharply on the door. "Boss got a messenger, from Clayton Ashford." The messenger was a weaselly-looking man who wouldn't meet Nathan's eyes. He thrust a sealed letter forward like it might bite him, then turned and rode away without waiting for a response. Nathan broke the seal, reading quickly. His expression darkened with each line. "What is it?" Maggie asked. "Ultimatum. Clayton gives me 7 days to sell him this land, $5,000. If I refuse, consequences are mine to bear." Nathan crumpled the paper. $5,000 for land worth millions. They're not even pretending to be reasonable. 7 days. Maggie counted silently. That means they're planning something specific, something that happens on day 8. An attack. Has to be. He's giving me time to second guess. Then he'll hit us when he thinks we're desperate or distracted. Jacob spat tobacco juice into a tin can. We ready for them? Getting there. But 7 days isn't much time. Nathan looked at Maggie. You could still leave, go somewhere safe. I'd give you money, help you start over. Stop that, Maggie said sharply. I'm not leaving. We're in this together. Remember, partners. Partners, Nathan echoed. Something shifted in his expression. Then I need to make something official. Jacob, fetch Tom and Charlie. I need witnesses. What for? A wedding. Maggie's eyes went wide. Now you want to get married now. Clayton's giving us 7 days. No point waiting. If something happens to me before we're legally married, you've got no claim to this property. But as my wife, you'd inherit. That changes the calculation for the Ashfords. Killing me wouldn't give them the land if you survive. Unless they kill me too. Which is exactly why we're training you to fight. But first things first, we make this legal. Then we make this defensible. The wedding took place at noon. Doc Miller, summoned from his cabin, served as both witness and officiant. He'd brought a Bible and a flask of whiskey prepared for either celebration or wake. Jacob and Tom stood as witnesses. The rest of the ranch hands gathered in a loose semicircle, hats in hands. Maggie wore her plainest dress. Nathan had shaved and put on a clean shirt, but otherwise made no special preparation. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate vows. Just 2 people standing in front of a fireplace promising to stand together against whatever came. Do you, Nathan Stone, take Margaret Ashford as your lawful wife? Doc's voice carried the weight of age and experience. To have and to hold in prosperity and hardship, in health and sickness. I do. Nathan's voice was steady. His eyes never left Maggie's face. And do you, Margaret Ashford, take Nathan Stone as your lawful husband, knowing the dangers, knowing the risks, knowing you face enemies together? Maggie thought of her family, of grandmother Helen's blessing, of the life she was leaving behind and the unknown future she was choosing. I do. Doc tied their hands together with a leather cord. Then by the authority invested in me by Montana Territory and God Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you can kiss your bride. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but in that moment, with his lips against hers, Maggie felt the promise of more. Of nights to come when gentleness would give way to passion. Of mornings waking beside someone who saw her worth. If they survived the next 7 days. The celebration was simple. Jacob produced a bottle of decent whiskey. The men passed it around, each offering a toast. Tom wished them long life and strong sons. Charlie hoped they'd see old age together. Doc, taking a long pull from the bottle, said simply, "May you be better together than you ever were apart." That evening, Nathan and Maggie stood on the porch watching the sunset. Officially married now, legal partners, but still learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. "I'll sleep in the guest room," Maggie said, "until we both agree otherwise." Nathan nodded. "Fair enough. This marriage started as strategy, but I want it to become real. That takes time. And trust. And trust." They were standing close now, shoulders almost touching. Maggie felt the warmth radiating from Nathan's body, felt the pull of attraction that had been building since her arrival. Before she could second-guess the impulse, she turned and kissed him again. Not the brief ceremonial kiss from earlier, a real kiss, deep and searching, a promise of passion to come. Nathan responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, heated, until they were both breathing hard. Then Nathan pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. "We should stop," he said roughly. "Why?" "Because if we don't, I'll carry you upstairs, and we'll consummate this marriage right now. And I want our first time to be about us, not about fear or strategy. I want it to matter." Maggie smiled, touched by his restraint. "Then we wait. But not too long, husband. I'm not a patient woman." I noticed. The next 3 days passed in a frenzy of final preparations. Nathan doubled the guard rotations. Jacob organized the men into fire teams, each group responsible for specific defensive positions. Maggie continued her shooting practice, her accuracy improving daily. On the third night around 3 in the morning, the warning bells rang. Nathan was up instantly, gun in hand. He burst from his room to find Maggie already in the hallway, fully dressed, rifle ready. "East Bells," she said, "near the storage barn." They rushed outside. Men were pouring from the bunkhouse, armed and moving with practiced efficiency. Jacob was already directing them to defensive positions, his voice calm despite the crisis. Smoke rose from the storage barn. Not much yet, but growing. Someone had set fire to their winter hay supply. "Jacob, get the men on that fire," Nathan shouted. "Maggie with me." They sprinted toward the fire. In the distance, 5 riders were fleeing silhouettes against the night sky. Nathan raised his rifle but didn't fire. Too far, too dark. He'd be wasting ammunition. But Maggie wasn't wasting anything. She dropped to one knee, braced her rifle, took careful aim, squeezed the trigger. One of the fleeing riders jerked his horse, stumbling. He managed to stay mounted, but clearly he'd been hit. The riders kicked their horses faster, disappearing into darkness. "Good shot," Nathan said. "You hit him." "In the leg, I think. Wasn't trying for a kill shot. Just wanted to slow them down." They returned to find the men had formed a bucket brigade from the creek. Water flew through the air, splashing against flames. The fire wasn't large yet. If they moved fast, they could save most of the hay. Nathan joined the line, passing buckets with mechanical efficiency. 30 minutes later, the fire was out. Damage assessment showed they'd lost maybe a quarter of their winter hay stores. Significant, but not catastrophic. The real message was clear: Clayton Ashford was making good on his threats. "This was just testing," Jacob observed. "Seeing how we respond, how fast we react. Next time won't be a warning." Nathan nodded grimly. "Next time they'll come in force. We need to be ready." They found the arsonist the next morning. Or rather, they found where he'd fallen from his horse. Blood trail led them east into a ravine. The man sat propped against a tree, gripping his wounded leg. He was young, maybe 28, with the hard look of someone who'd chosen violence as profession. Nathan recognized him from around the territory. Pete Larson, a gun for hire who'd work for anyone with cash. Not particularly skilled or smart, but willing to do dirty work. "Pete," Nathan said, looming over the wounded man, "you're on my land, bleeding on my soil. Want to tell me why before I leave you here for the wolves?" Pete's face was pale from blood loss. "Go to hell, Stone." Maggie stepped forward, her rifle pointed at Pete's good leg. "You've already been shot once. Want to lose the other leg? Or maybe you'd prefer I aim higher. Test my accuracy on smaller targets." Pete's eyes went wide. He'd clearly underestimated the woman. "You wouldn't." "She would," Nathan said flatly. "Miss Maggie's family raised her to be ruthless. Only difference is she's ruthless for good reasons, not profit. Now talk. Who hired you? How many men total? When's the main attack?" The interrogation took 15 minutes. Pete, faced with Maggie's very real threat, and his own bleeding leg, broke completely. He revealed everything. Clayton Ashford had hired 10 men. Professional guns, not amateurs. Their job was to make life impossible for Nathan. Burn crops, poison water, kill livestock. Wear him down until he gave up or made a mistake. "And if Stone doesn't break," Nathan asked, "then we're supposed to kill you. Day 7, direct assault. Burn the house with everyone inside if we have to." Nathan and Jacob exchanged glances. 4 days. They had 4 days to prepare for a coordinated attack by professional gunmen. They left Pete tied to the tree, wounded but alive. Doc Miller would treat him later, then they'd turn him over to the county sheriff. Right now they had more pressing concerns. Back at the ranch, Nathan called everyone together. The men assembled quickly, their faces showing the strain of interrupted sleep and constant vigilance. "Clayton Ashford's coming in 4 days," Nathan announced. "He's bringing 9 more guns, professional killers. They plan to burn us out, maybe kill everyone who resists. So here's the situation. Anyone who wants to leave, do it now. No shame, no hard feelings. This isn't your fight." No one moved. Tom Wilson spoke up. "Boss, you gave me work when I had nothing. You trusted me when others saw a drunk trying to reform. This is exactly my fight." Similar sentiments echoed from the others. These weren't just employees, they were men who'd found dignity and purpose at Stone Ranch. They'd defend it with their lives if necessary. "All right then," Nathan said. "We've got 4 days to turn this place into a fortress. Jacob, you're in charge of fortifications. Maggie, you work with Doc on medical supplies. Everyone else we're going to train like we're already under siege, because in 4 days we will be." The next 4 days blurred together. They built sandbag walls around key positions, dug shallow trenches for cover, stockpiled ammunition at strategic points. Jacob, drawing on his military experience, designed overlapping fields of fire where attackers would have nowhere to hide. Maggie surprised everyone with her stamina. She worked as hard as any man digging hauling planning. At night she studied maps of the property, memorizing every feature. She cleaned weapons, loaded ammunition, prepared medical kits. When Nathan suggested she was pushing herself too hard, she'd fixed him with a level stare. "They're coming for us, Nathan. For our home. I'm not facing that unprepared." Our home. The words warmed something deep in Nathan's chest. This was no longer his ranch. It was theirs. A partnership in every sense. The evening before the expected attack, Nathan found Maggie in the barn. She was checking her rifle for the dozenth time, making sure everything functioned perfectly. He watched her for a moment, this fierce woman who'd chosen him over safety. "Maggie," she looked up, "we should get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." "In a minute. There's something I need to tell you first." Nathan moved closer. "When I married you, I said it was strategy, a way to protect you and complicate things for the Ashfords. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What's the rest?" "The rest is that I fell in love with you 5 years ago at a market when you defended a stranger. I've been in love with you every day since, even when I didn't know your name, even when I thought I'd never see you again. So, if tomorrow goes wrong, if Clayton's men overwhelm us, I want you to know that this week with you has been the best week of my life since Emily died. You gave me hope again. You made me remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just surviving." Maggie set down her rifle. She moved to Nathan, cupping his face in both hands. "Nathan Stone, you fool. You beautiful, brave fool. I love you too. I think I loved you the moment you believed me when I warned you, the moment you saw me as an ally instead of a liability. And tomorrow we're going to survive. We're going to fight, and we're going to win. And then we're going to have a real wedding night, one that isn't overshadowed by threats or fear. I promise you that." They kissed then long and deep, a kiss that held both promise and desperation, the kiss of two people who knew tomorrow might bring death, but chose to embrace life anyway. That night Nathan didn't go to the guest room, neither did Maggie. They came together in his bed in the dark with tenderness born of knowing time might be short. Nathan was gentle, attentive, making sure Maggie felt cherished rather than rushed. Afterward they lay tangled together, skin against skin, heartbeats synchronizing. "No regrets?" Nathan asked. "Only that we didn't do this sooner." They slept maybe 3 hours. Then the bells rang. 3 in the morning, the time Clayton had chosen for his attack. Darkness would mask his approach, make his men harder to target. It was smart tactics. Nathan had expected nothing less. He and Maggie dressed in seconds, moving with practiced efficiency. Outside, men were rushing to positions. The sound of hoofbeats echoed from multiple directions. This wasn't a probe like the barn fire. This was the real assault. Nathan grabbed his rifle, checking the action one last time. Beside him, Maggie did the same. Her face was calm, focused. She'd transformed from society woman to warrior in just over a week. Nathan had never been more proud. "East side," Jacob's voice called. At least 15 riders, more than they'd expected. Clayton had brought reinforcements. Nathan did quick math. Even with their defensive advantages, they were facing 2-to-1 odds. "Everyone to positions," Nathan shouted. "Fire on my command." He took his position behind a sandbag wall facing east. Maggie crouched beside him, rifle ready. In the pre-dawn darkness, he could just make out the approaching riders. They moved in formation, disciplined rather than wild, definitely professionals. 150 yards. 100. 75. Nathan waited. Let them come closer. Make every shot count. 50 yards. Fire. The night exploded. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Gun smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. Nathan fired, levered, another round, fired again. Beside him, Maggie's rifle cracked with steady rhythm. 2 attackers fell in the first volley. Another jerked sideways, clearly hit. But the rest kept coming, returning fire. Bullets whined overhead, thudded into sandbags, splintered wood on the barn behind them. Nathan saw Clayton, then recognizable even in chaos. The young Ashford was hanging back, letting his hired guns take the risks while he watched from safety. Typical. Rich men bought their courage with other people's blood. "Concentrate fire on the left," Jacob bellowed. "Drive them into the creek." The defenders adjusted aim. 3 more attackers went down. The rest wheeled their horses, seeking cover. Clayton's voice carried across the battlefield, shrill with fury. "Press them! Burn them out!" But the attack had lost momentum. The attackers had expected frightened civilians, not disciplined resistance. They'd expected to ride in fire, a few shots, watch people panic. Instead, they'd hit a coordinated defense that cost them men and horses. After 10 minutes of fierce exchange, Clayton called retreat. The attackers disengaged, dragging their wounded, leaving 2 dead behind. They disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, their defeat marked by blood trails and abandoned weapons. Nathan waited 5 minutes, making sure it wasn't a feint. Then he allowed himself to breathe. They'd survived. First engagement, and they'd survived. "Casualties," he called. Jacob did a quick check. Tom took a bullet in the arm. Charlie's got a crease across his ribs. Everyone else fine. Maggie still crouched beside Nathan, her rifle smoking. She'd fired at least 20 rounds. Her face showed no emotion, but her hands trembled slightly. Aftermath of battle. Nathan recognized the shakes that came when adrenaline faded and reality reasserted itself. He took her rifle gently. "You did good, real good. I shot a man, maybe killed him. You defended your home. There's a difference." "Is there?" "He's still dead. His family still lost someone." Nathan understood. He'd felt this same guilt after his first battle. The realization that violence, however justified, still carried moral weight. "Yes, he's dead. But he came here to kill us, to burn our home with us inside. You didn't start this fight, Maggie. You just refused to die in it. There's no shame in that." She nodded slowly, accepting, if not entirely believing. Nathan held her for a moment, letting her process. Around them, men checked weapons, reloaded, prepared for potential second wave. But as dawn broke, properly spreading gold across the valley, it became clear Clayton had withdrawn completely. They'd won. First battle against superior numbers, and they'd won. But Nathan knew better than to celebrate. This was just the opening move. Clayton Ashford wouldn't give up after one defeat. He'd regroup, bring more men, try different tactics. The siege had begun, and it would only end when one side lay dead or defeated. The question was which side that would be. Dawn revealed the cost of battle. 2 dead attackers lay where they'd fallen, bodies already stiffening in the mountain cold. Nathan's men had dragged them away from the defensive positions, covering them with canvas tarps. Even enemies deserved that basic dignity. Tom Wilson sat on a barrel while Doc Miller extracted the bullet from his arm. The young ranch hand gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. When Doc finally pulled the slug free, dropping it into a tin cup with a wet clink, Tom managed a weak grin. "Souvenir," he said. "Something to show my grandkids, if I live that long." "You will," Doc said, wrapping the wound with clean bandages. "Bullet missed the bone, missed major vessels. You'll have a scar and a story. Could be worse." Charlie's rib wound was superficial, the bullet having carved a furrow across his side without penetrating. He'd be sore for weeks, but functional. The fact that only 2 men had been wounded testified to the effectiveness of their preparations. Without the sandbag walls and trenches, casualties would have been much higher. Nathan walked the perimeter as Sun climbed higher, checking defenses, looking for weak points Clayton might exploit in a second attack. Maggie accompanied him, quiet but observant. The tremor had left her hands. She'd processed the violence, accepted its necessity, moved forward. That resilience impressed Nathan more than her shooting accuracy, though that was formidable too. "They'll be back," Maggie said. Not a question, a statement. Yes, Clayton won't accept defeat. His pride's wounded worse than Tom's arm. So we wait and prepare, and hope the sheriff gets word about what's happening here. Nathan had sent one of the ranch hands to Virginia City yesterday with a letter detailing Clayton's threats and actions. But the sheriff's office was 100 miles away. Help, if it came at all, would take days. They were on their own. Jacob found them near the eastern fence line. The foreman's weathered face showed strain. Battle always took a toll, even on veterans. "Boss, we need to talk about ammunition. We burned through maybe 300 rounds last night. Got another 1,000 in reserve, but if they keep coming like that, we'll run dry inside a week. Then we have to make them count more. Controlled fire. Aim for center mass. No wasting shots on suppression." Nathan turned to Maggie. "Can you teach the men to shoot like you do that steady-aimed fire?" "I can try, but they're already pretty good." "Good isn't good enough against professionals. We need excellent." The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Maggie ran shooting drills, teaching the men her technique. Breathe slow. Squeeze, don't pull. Follow through. She'd learned from books and practice. Now she passed that knowledge to men who'd been shooting since childhood, but never with real precision. Tom, despite his wounded arm, proved to be a natural once he slowed down. "I always just pointed and fired," he admitted. "Never thought about making each shot perfect." "Perfect keeps you alive," Maggie said. "Rushed gets you killed." They reinforced defenses, adding more sandbag positions, creating fallback points if the outer perimeter was breached. Jacob suggested putting broken glass and caltrops around likely approach routes. It was dirty fighting, but this wasn't a gentleman's duel. This was survival. On the third night, Nathan and Maggie sat on the porch after supper. The ranch had settled into uneasy quiet. Men took turns on watch, 2 hours on, 4 hours off. Everyone was exhausted. The constant vigilance wore on them like sandpaper on wood, slowly grinding away peace of mind. "I keep thinking about my grandmother," Maggie said suddenly. "She must have heard about the attack by now. Must be worried sick." "You want to send her a letter?" "Let her know you're safe." "No. Any letter I send my father will intercept. He can't know I'm here by choice, that I'm fighting alongside you. He has to keep thinking I'm the unwitting weapon, the fool daughter who doesn't understand what's happening." Nathan took her hand. "That's hard, letting someone you love worry." "Everything about this is hard." Maggie leaned against him, finding comfort in his solid presence. "But I wouldn't change it. Being here with you, fighting for something real instead of just enduring my family's contempt. This is the first time in my life I've felt like I matter, like what I do makes a difference. You matter to me, more than you know." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. The night was beautiful, deceptively peaceful. Hard to believe that somewhere out there Clayton Ashford was planning their deaths. The attack came not on the 4th day, but the 5th, just after midnight. This time the warning bells gave them barely a minute's notice. Nathan woke to the sound of gunfire already happening. Someone had cut the eastern bells, silencing early warning. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside in his undershirt and trousers, boots unlaced. Maggie was right behind him, similarly half-dressed, but fully armed. The scene was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Men were shouting, trying to coordinate in the confusion. This attack was different, smarter. The raiders had split into 3 groups, hitting multiple points simultaneously. The eastern contingent was just a distraction. The real threat came from the North Canyon, the vulnerable point Maggie had identified on their first patrol. "North side," Jacob's voice cut through the chaos. "They're flanking us." Nathan ran toward the north defenses, Maggie keeping pace. They reached the position just as 8 riders burst from the canyon. The tin can warning system had triggered, but too late. The attackers were already inside the defensive perimeter. The next minutes were pure violence. Close-range fighting where every shot mattered. Nathan fired, dropped one rider, levered another round, fired again. Miss. The rider kept coming, pistol raised. Before Nathan could chamber a third round, Maggie shot the man from his saddle. Her bullet took him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and dumping him in the dirt. "Behind you!" Maggie screamed. Nathan spun. Another rider almost on top of him. No time to aim. He swung his rifle like a club, catching the man across the face. Bone crunched. The rider fell his horse, bolting into darkness. The fight raged for perhaps 8 minutes. Then Nathan heard a voice that made his blood freeze. "Stone drop your weapons or the old man dies." Clayton Ashford stood at the edge of the clearing, his arm locked around Doc Miller's throat. The physician's medical bag lay spilled in the dirt. He must have been riding to check on wounded when Clayton captured him. "You've got 10 seconds. Clayton shouted, pressing a gun to Doc's temple. "Sign over the deed or he's dead." Nathan's mind raced. Surrendering meant death for everyone, but letting Doc die was unthinkable. Doc Miller's eyes met Nathan's across the distance. The old physician gave the smallest shake of his head. Then, with surprising speed for a man of 70, Doc drove his elbow backward into Clayton's ribs. The gun went off, but Maggie's rifle cracked a half-second earlier. Her bullet took Clayton high in the shoulder, spinning him around. Doc stumbled forward as Clayton's shot went wild, missing by inches. Nathan sprinted forward, catching Doc before he fell. "You crazy old fool." "Better a live fool than a dead coward," Doc wheezed. His face was pale, but he managed a grin. "That girl's a hell of a shot." Clayton clutched his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader wounded, lost their nerve. Within minutes, the fight was over. The surviving attackers retreated, taking their wounded with them. This time, they'd left 3 bodies behind. Nathan's side had lost no one, but 4 men were wounded. Nothing life-threatening, but painful injuries that would limit their fighting effectiveness. As Doc Miller tended the wounded, Nathan did a perimeter check. He found where the attackers had cut the warning bells, professional work done silently in darkness. They'd used the eastern attack to mask their main thrust from the north. Only luck and Maggie's warning shout had prevented Nathan from being killed. "They're learning," Jacob observed, "adjusting tactics. Next time they'll be even smarter." "Maybe there won't be a next time," Doc said, looking up from bandaging Charlie's leg. "Maybe they've had enough." Nathan shook his head. "Clayton's not the type to quit. He'll keep coming until we're dead, or he is. That's how men like him operate. They can't conceive of losing." "Then we need to change the equation," Maggie said. She'd found a coat and pulled it on over her nightdress, presenting an odd combination of domesticity and warfare. "We need to take the fight to them, make them react to us instead of us reacting to them." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we find out where they're camped, scout their position, maybe even strike first next time." Jacob looked skeptical. "That's risky. We'd be leaving the defenses going into unknown terrain facing enemies on their ground." "But we'd have surprise on our side. They expect us to stay here, wait for them to attack. What if we don't?" Nathan considered. It was bold, dangerous. But Maggie was right about the psychology. Every military commander knew that defense was reactive, offense was proactive. Right now, Clayton controlled the tempo of battle. He decided when to attack, where to hit, how many men to commit. That advantage would eventually wear them down. "We'll scout them," Nathan decided. "Small team, 2 or 3 men. Find their camp, assess their strength, report back. Then we decide if we can hit them or if we need a different strategy." "I'm going," Maggie said immediately. "No." "Yes, I know Clayton. I know how he thinks, and I can move quietly, something most of your cowboys can't." Nathan wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed against putting Maggie in more danger, but she was right. She knew Clayton better than anyone, and she'd proven herself in combat. Treating her as fragile would be insulting and tactically foolish. "Fine. You, me, and Jacob. We leave at first light." They set out 3 hours later, moving on foot rather than horseback. Horses made noise, left obvious trails. 3 people could move through forest with relative stealth if they were careful. Jacob's wooden leg complicated things, but the old soldier had learned to move quietly despite his handicap. They headed east, following the direction the attackers had fled. Blood trails made tracking easy initially. Then the trails split, diverged, rejoined. Professional work again, making pursuit difficult. But eventually, the signs led them to a clearing 5 miles from Nathan's ranch. The camp was obvious once they found it. 15 horses picketed near a stream. Tents clustered around a central fire pit. Men moved about with the casual confidence of those who believed themselves safe. Nathan counted 14 visible fighters, plus Clayton, who sat under an awning examining maps. They watched from cover of pine trees, staying downwind so the horses wouldn't scent them. Nathan memorized everything: guard positions, ammunition stores, the layout that would matter if they launched a raid. "We could hit them tonight," Maggie whispered. "Burn their supplies, scatter their horses, leave them stranded." "Or we could get killed trying," Jacob countered. "There's 3 of us and 14 of them." 15, Maggie corrected, pointing. Another man had emerged from a tent, this one wearing expensive clothes despite the rough conditions. "That's my brother Clayton." Nathan studied the young Ashford through the trees. Clayton looked frustrated, angry, gesturing sharply as he spoke to his hired guns, probably berating them for the failed attacks. Men who paid for loyalty rarely got the genuine article. These guns would abandon Clayton the moment things turned against them. Mercenaries had survival instincts that overrode contract obligations. As they watched, another rider approach the camp, not from the direction of Nathan's ranch, but from the east, from Timber Ridge. Nathan's gut tightened. Reinforcements. More guns for Clayton to throw at them. The rider dismounted near Clayton. Even at this distance, Nathan could see the family resemblance. Older, heavier, but sharing Clayton's arrogant bearing. "That's my father," Maggie breathed. "Richard Ashford." Richard's arrival changed everything. The elder Ashford hadn't come just to observe. He'd come to take charge. His voice carried across the clearing, harsh and commanding. "You've failed twice, Clayton. Lost good men, spent my money, achieved nothing. I'm taking over this operation. We end this tomorrow. All of us a direct assault. Burn the house. Kill everyone inside. No more half measures." Tomorrow. Nathan felt ice settle in his stomach. Richard Ashford was bringing perhaps 20 men, including whatever reinforcements he'd brought from Timber Ridge. Even with their defenses, even with superior positions, those odds were impossible. They retreated carefully, making their way back to the ranch without being spotted. The journey took 3 hours, moving slowly through forest and across open ground when necessary. By the time they reached home, the sun had climbed to afternoon position. Nathan gathered everyone. Men assembled quickly, sensing the gravity in his expression. Richard Ashford arrived at Clayton's camp with reinforcements. "They're coming tomorrow with everything they have. 20 men, maybe more. This will be the final push. They mean to kill us all." Silence greeted this announcement. Then Tom spoke up, his wounded arm in a sling. "What do we do, boss?" "We fight. We hold the line. And we pray the sheriff gets here before we run out of ammunition or men." Nathan looked around at the assembled faces. Some scared, some determined, all loyal. "I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered 3 to 1. We might not survive this. Anyone who wants to leave, do it now. I'll give you horses, supplies, money. No shame in choosing life over this fight." No one moved. These men had chosen their side. They'd stand or fall together. "Then we prepare. Triple-check every weapon. Stockpile extra ammunition at each position. Make sure we have water, food, medical supplies. Get some rest if you can, because tomorrow hell comes to Stone Ranch." That night Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, Maggie curled against him, listening to her breathing. She'd fallen asleep from exhaustion, but Nathan's mind raced. 20 men, professionals, attacking at dawn when defenders would be tired, visibility would be poor. Even if they survived, the cost would be enormous. He thought about Emily, about the promise he'd made to be happy again. He was happy, or at least on the path toward happiness. Maggie had given him that. But what good was happiness if it ended in a shallow grave on Montana soil? "You're thinking too much," Maggie murmured, not opening her eyes. "I can hear your thoughts from here." "Can't help it. 20-to-1 odds. That's a massacre. Or it's a victory that gets told for generations." She opened her eyes, turning to face him. "Either way, we face it together. And Nathan, I need you to know something. These past 2 weeks with you have been the best of my life. I've felt valued, respected, loved. If tomorrow is our last day at least, I'll die having lived truly for once." "Don't talk like that." "Why not? Death is coming either way. We might as well acknowledge it." She kissed him softly. "Make love to me, Nathan. One more time. Not frantically, not desperately. Slowly, like we have all the time in the world." They did, moving together in the darkness, finding comfort and connection in physical intimacy. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin cooling in the night air. Nathan felt the steady thump of Maggie's heart against his chest. That heart, that fierce spirit, that brave soul, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Dawn came too quickly. Gray light filtered through windows, bringing with it the realization that today was the day. Nathan dressed in silence, methodically checking his weapons. 2 rifles, 2 pistols, a knife. Enough ammunition to fight for hours if necessary. Maggie dressed similarly, moving with the same quiet efficiency. She'd braided her hair tightly, keeping it out of her face. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Whatever fear she felt, she'd mastered it. They descended to find the men already assembled. Doc Miller had set up a medical station in the kitchen, laying out bandages, whiskey for disinfecting wounds, laudanum for pain. His hands shook slightly, but his jaw was set. The old physician would save who he could and record who he couldn't. "Positions," Nathan ordered. Men dispersed to assigned posts. East wall, north canyon, south fence line, west approach. Every angle covered overlapping fields of fire, fallback positions prepared. They'd done everything possible. Now they waited. The sun climbed higher. 8 o'clock. 9. 10. No attack. The delay was deliberate, Nathan realized. Psychological warfare. Let the defenders wait. Let tension build. Let fear accumulate. Then strike when nerves were raw and concentration had wavered from sustained vigilance. It was good tactics. It was also maddening. 11 o'clock. Noon. Still nothing. Men shifted restlessly. The waiting was worse than fighting. At least in battle you could act, respond, do something other than stand and imagine horrors. 1 o'clock. Nathan was beginning to wonder if Richard had changed plans when the bells rang. All of them. Every warning system triggered simultaneously. The Ashfords were coming, and they weren't bothering with stealth. Nathan took his position at the east wall beside Maggie. Through the defensive gap in the sandbags he could see them. 22 riders moving in formation. They rode slowly, deliberately, making their numbers visible, making their threat clear. Richard Ashford led the formation, sitting his horse like some feudal lord surveying conquered territory. To his right rode Clayton, to his left, a hard-looking man who was probably the gun's leader. Behind them came the hired killers, men who'd done this kind of work before. They stopped 50 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range but close enough to shout. Richard raised one hand, his voice carried clearly across the distance. "Nathan Stone, you've caused me considerable expense and trouble, but I'm a reasonable man. I'll make you one final offer. Sign over your deed. Leave Montana Territory. I'll pay you $10,000 and let you go. You have my word, no one will pursue you." Nathan stood, making himself visible above the sandbag wall. "Your word isn't worth spit, Ashford. You sent your daughter to marry me so you could kill me and steal my land. You think I'll believe any promise you make?" Richard's expression darkened. "That was Clayton's plan, not mine. But since you mention Margaret, where is my wayward daughter? I'd like to speak with her." Maggie rose to stand beside Nathan. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "I'm here, Father, where I choose to be." "Margaret, don't be foolish. Stone has poisoned your mind against your family. Come home. We'll forget this little rebellion. The only poison is the corruption you've spread for decades. I know what you are, Father. I know about Henry Cooper. I know you had him killed to steal his land claim. I have proof. Evidence I sent to the territorial governor." Richard's face went pale, then red. "You little bitch. You'd betray your own father. You betrayed me the day I was born. You wanted a son, got 3 daughters. Treated us like property to be married off or discarded. Well, I'm discarding you. I'm married to Nathan Stone. This is my home now, and you're trespassing." The silence that followed was profound. Then Richard began to laugh. It was an ugly sound devoid of humor. "You think marriage protects you? You think I won't kill my own daughter? Child, you're more naive than I thought. Clayton, handle this. Kill them all." Clayton raised his hand to signal the attack. Then a voice called from behind the Ashford formation. "Nobody moves. This is Sheriff Williams." Nathan's heart leaped. The sheriff. He'd made it. Behind Richard's formation, 10 men on horseback emerged from the tree line. At their head rode Sheriff Thomas Williams, a grizzled veteran in his 50s who'd kept order in Virginia City for 20 years. His badge glinted in afternoon sun. His rifle rested across his saddle, pointed generally at Richard's back. "Richard Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted claim jumping, and hiring gunmen to assault law-abiding citizens. Clayton Ashford, you're under arrest on the same charges. Rest of you, throw down your weapons. Anyone who resists will be shot." For a moment the hired guns looked to Richard. The old man's face worked through a series of expressions: rage, disbelief, calculation, then resignation. He knew when he was beaten. 20 years of bribery and corruption had finally caught up with him. "You can't prove anything," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can." Sheriff Williams rode forward, keeping his rifle trained on Richard. "Mrs. Stone sent me a detailed letter outlining your entire plot, including sworn statements from Pete Larson, who you hired to burn Mr. Stone's property, including evidence about Henry Cooper's murder that the territorial court has been investigating. You're done, Ashford. You and your whole corrupt operation." The hired guns, seeing their employer arrested, began dropping weapons and raising hands. They were mercenaries, not fanatics. With no one to pay them, they had no reason to fight. Within minutes, Sheriff Williams's deputies had them all disarmed and under guard. Richard sat his horse wrists, now bound, glaring at Maggie with pure hatred. "You did this. You betrayed your family for a dirt farmer and his pathetic ranch." Maggie walked forward until she stood directly in front of her father's horse. "No, father. I saved an innocent man from a murderer. That's not betrayal. That's justice. Something you've never understood. You'll regret this. When I'm free, when my lawyers clear me, you'll regret this. You won't be free. Not for murder. Montana Territory hangs killers regardless of how much money they have." Maggie's voice was ice. "You taught me to be ruthless, father, to do whatever necessary to win. Well, I learned that lesson perfectly. I won. You lost. And now you'll spend the rest of your life in prison knowing your wayward daughter defeated you." Sheriff Williams motioned to his deputies. "Get them out of here, all of them, back to Virginia City for trial." As the Ashfords and their hired guns were led away, Nathan emerged from behind the defensive wall. Relief flooded through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. It was over, really over. They'd won without a final battle, without more bloodshed. Maggie turned as he approached, and the expression on her face made his breath catch. Joy, relief, triumph, love, all mixed together in a look that promised everything he'd hoped for. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he half feared he'd break her. "You did it. Your letter to the sheriff, your evidence about Henry Cooper. You saved us all. We saved us, together, like you promised." The celebration that night was subdued but genuine. Men gathered in the main house drinking whiskey and rehashing the past 2 weeks. Tom entertained everyone with an increasingly embellished version of his shooting the first attacker. Charlie demonstrated how he dug the best defensive trench despite his wounded ribs. Doc Miller got progressively drunker and more sentimental, eventually crying about how proud he was of everyone. Nathan and Maggie slipped away around midnight, escaping to the porch for quiet. The ranch spread below them, peaceful under starlight. Hard to believe that just hours ago they'd been preparing to fight a battle to the death. "What happens now?" Maggie asked. "After the trial, after everything settles? We live, we build, we make this place into something worth defending." Nathan gestured at the valley. "I've been thinking. That silver under Boulder Creek. We could mine it, become wealthy beyond imagining. Or we could use it to build something bigger than wealth. Schools, a hospital, a library, things this territory needs." "Both," Maggie said decisively. "We mine enough to be comfortable to secure our future. Then we invest the rest in the community, build something that lasts beyond us." "Beyond us? You're thinking long-term." "I'm thinking about children." She took his hand, placing it on her stomach. "Our children. Who will inherit this ranch, this valley, this legacy we create? I want them to grow up knowing their parents built something meaningful. Not just land and cattle, but a community where people look after each other." Nathan felt his throat tighten. Children. A family. The dream he'd buried with Emily resurrected by this fierce woman who'd walked into his life and changed everything. "How many children are we talking about?" "At least 3, maybe 4. Enough to fill this big house with noise and life and chaos." Maggie grinned. "You ready for that, Nathan Stone?" "With you, I'm ready for anything." The trial of Richard and Clayton Ashford became the biggest news in Montana Territory. Newspapers from Virginia City to Helena covered every detail. The evidence Maggie had gathered, combined with testimony from Pete Larson and other witnesses, painted a damning picture. Richard Ashford had spent 20 years building an empire through bribery, intimidation, and murder. The Henry Cooper killing was just one crime among many. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Nathan and Maggie attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching justice unfold. Richard showed no remorse, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Clayton crumbled under questioning, eventually admitting his role in the conspiracy to kill Nathan. The verdict came swift and unanimous. Richard Ashford guilty on all counts, sentenced to 25 years in territorial prison. Clayton Ashford guilty of conspiracy and attempted murder, 15 years. The judge, an elderly man who'd seen Montana Territory evolve from wilderness to civilization, delivered the sentence with grim satisfaction. "Mr. Ashford, you represent everything wrong with unchecked greed. You believed wealth placed you above the law. You were wrong. This court sentences you to reflect on your crimes in the territorial penitentiary. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none." Eleanor Ashford sat in the gallery, her face a mask of rage and denial. She'd lost everything. Her husband imprisoned her son, convicted, her family's reputation destroyed. The Ashford fortune would be seized to pay damages to Richard's victims. She'd be lucky to avoid destitution. As they left the courthouse, Eleanor intercepted Maggie. "You destroyed us, your own family. I hope you're satisfied." "I am," Maggie replied calmly. "You made me feel worthless my entire life. Told me I was too difficult, too problematic, too much trouble. Turns out I was exactly enough. Enough to stop you, enough to find love, enough to build something real. So yes, Mother, I'm very satisfied." Eleanor spat at Maggie's feet, then turned and stalked away. It was the last time Maggie would see her mother. Eleanor left Montana Territory within a month, moving to San Francisco, where no one knew the Ashford name or shame. 6 months after the trial, Stone Ranch had transformed. The silver mine was operational, producing steady income that exceeded Nathan's most optimistic projections. But rather than hoarding wealth, Nathan and Maggie invested it back into Pine Ridge Valley. The school opened in April 1886, a solid structure built to accommodate 60 students. They'd hired 2 teachers from back east, educated women who brought books and learning to children who'd never had consistent schooling. The first day of classes, 23 children attended. Within a month, that number had doubled. The hospital followed in June. Doc Miller served as chief physician, finally able to practice medicine with proper equipment and supplies. The building had 8 beds, a surgery room, and a pharmacy stocked with modern medications. Doc hired 2 nurses, trained women who could assist with everything from childbirth to battlefield injuries. The library came last, opening in August. Nathan had ordered 500 books from publishers in New York and Boston. Classics, medical texts, agricultural guides, novels, histories. Knowledge free for anyone who wanted it. Maggie oversaw the library, personally cataloging volumes and teaching reading classes for adults who'd never learned. The ranch prospered too. Nathan expanded the herd to 500 head. He'd hired 20 men, now paying wages that made Stone Ranch the most sought-after employment in the territory. Workers had decent housing, regular meals, and employers who treated them with respect. In return, Nathan got loyalty and dedication that money alone could never buy. And Maggie had been right about children. She'd become pregnant within months of the trial's conclusion. Now, 6 months along, her belly swelled with the promise of new life. Nathan watched her move through the house, arranging furniture in the nursery they'd prepared, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. This woman had saved him in every way a person could be saved. One evening in late summer, they stood on the hill overlooking the valley, the same hill where Emily and her baby lay buried. Nathan had worried that bringing Maggie here might feel wrong, like he was betraying Emily's memory, but Maggie had insisted. "She's part of your story," Maggie had said, "which makes her part of mine too. I want to pay my respects." Now they stood before the graves, Maggie's hand in Nathan's. She'd brought flowers, placing them gently on both markers. "Emily," Maggie said softly, "I never met you, but I love your husband, and he tells me you were wonderful. I promise I'll take care of him. I promise I'll love him the way you did. And I promise our child will know about you, about how much Nathan loved you, about how your loss shaped him into the man I married." Nathan felt tears on his face. He'd cried rarely since Emily's death, keeping grief locked inside where it couldn't overwhelm him. But Maggie's words, spoken to a grave with such genuine respect, broke something loose. He cried for Emily, for the years lost, for the child that never drew breath, for the second chance he'd been given when he thought hope was dead. Maggie held him while he wept, saying nothing, just offering the strength of her presence. When the tears finally stopped, Nathan wiped his face and managed a shaky smile. "Thank you." "For what?" "For understanding, for not being jealous of a ghost, for being exactly who you are." "I'm not jealous because I'm secure. You love me, Nathan Stone." Present tense, active voice, no qualifications. "Emily had your past. I have your present and your future. That's enough." They walked down the hill together as sunset painted the valley in gold and crimson. Below them, lights began appearing in windows. The school where teachers prepared tomorrow's lessons. The hospital where Doc Miller tended a rancher's broken leg. The bunkhouse where men played cards and told stories. The library where farmers practiced reading by lamplight. A community. A real functioning community built on principles of fairness and mutual support. This was Emily's dream and Nathan's achievement and Maggie's contribution. This was their legacy, growing more solid with each passing day. 10 years later, summer of 1896, the valley had transformed beyond recognition. Pine Ridge had evolved from a scattered collection of ranches into a proper town. 300 people called it home. The school had expanded twice now, housing 8 teachers and 150 students. The hospital had added a second floor. The library held 2,000 volumes. Stone Ranch remained the valley's heart and economic engine. Nathan, now 45, still rose before dawn to check cattle and ride fence lines. Gray dominated his hair and beard, but his body remained strong from constant labor. He'd learned to delegate more, trusting his 25 employees to handle daily operations while he focused on strategic decisions. Maggie, at 34, managed both the household and her community work. She served on the school board, supervised the library, and ran the valley's first women's cooperative, teaching farming skills and business practices to wives who wanted economic independence. She'd also given birth to 4 children who kept life interesting. Henry, their firstborn, had just turned 9. He resembled Nathan physically, but inherited Maggie's sharp mind and moral compass. The boy spent hours in the library devouring books about everything from ancient Rome to modern engineering. Nathan suspected his son would leave the ranch eventually, seek education back east, maybe become a lawyer or teacher. That was fine. The world needed more than ranchers. Emily, named for Nathan's first wife, was 7. She had her mother's determination and her father's quiet strength. While Henry buried himself in books, Emily preferred the stables, working with horses with natural skill that amazed everyone. She could gentle the wildest mount, earning trust through patience rather than force. Thomas came next at 4, named for Tom Wilson, the loyal ranch hand who'd taken a bullet defending their home and never once complained. Young Tom inherited his namesake's steady courage and cheerful spirit. Young Tom was trouble incarnate, constantly climbing things he shouldn't, exploring places he'd been forbidden, asking questions that had no easy answers. Nathan loved the boy's spirit, even while despairing of keeping him alive to adulthood. The youngest, Sarah, was just 6 months old. Named for the housekeeper who'd helped Maggie escape Timber Ridge, baby Sarah had her mother's eyes and what promised to be her father's size. She was a happy baby who rarely cried, content to observe the chaos of family life with solemn attention. On an August evening, the family gathered on the hill overlooking the valley. It had become tradition, this weekly pilgrimage to Emily's grave. The children understood that their father had loved another woman before their mother, that loss had shaped him, that honoring the dead mattered. "Tell us again about the battle," Henry asked. He never tired of the story, this family legend that had become valley folklore. Nathan glanced at Maggie, who nodded. The story was important, not because it glorified violence, but because it taught lessons about courage, sacrifice, and standing for what's right even when the cost is high. "Your mother and I were outnumbered," Nathan began. 20 men came to take our home, our land, our lives. Most people would have run. Your mother chose to fight." "Because running meant letting bad men win," Emily interjected. At 7, she'd already grasped the story's moral core. "Exactly. So we prepared, built defenses, trained men who'd never fought before, and when the attack came, we held the line. Not because we were braver or stronger, but because we had something worth defending." "And then Sheriff Williams came," Thomas added, bouncing with excitement, "and arrested the bad men." "He did, because your mother had gathered evidence, sent letters, made sure the law knew what was happening. Violence isn't the only weapon against evil. Sometimes patience and documentation work better than bullets." Maggie lifted baby Sarah, pointing toward the valley. "See all those lights, sweet girl, the school where children learn to read, the hospital where sick people get well, the library full of books and knowledge. Your father and I built those things. Not alone, but together with people who believe communities should help each other." "That's our legacy," Nathan said, looking at his older children. "Not just this ranch, though, that's important. Not just money or land or cattle. Our legacy is making sure people have chances we almost lost. Education, health care, justice. That's what matters. That's what outlasts us." Henry nodded seriously. "When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. Help people like you help the valley." "You'll be a good lawyer," Nathan said. "Fair and honest. The world needs those." Emily tugged his sleeve. "Papa, can I run the ranch when you're old?" "You absolutely can if that's what you want. This place will be here for whoever wants to continue the work." They sat together as darkness gathered, parents and children watching the valley transform from daylight to lamplight. Down below, the community they'd built went about its evening routines, families eating supper, students finishing homework, Doc Miller making house calls, the librarian locking up for the night. A decade ago, Nathan had been alone on this hill, talking to graves, believing his life's best years were behind him. Now he was surrounded by the noise and chaos of children, by the warmth of a wife who made every day better, by the satisfaction of seeing dreams made real. "What are you thinking?" Maggie asked, reading his expression. "That your family tried to send you here as a weapon, as punishment, as a cruel joke. And instead I found home. We both did." Nathan put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things. Your family's cruelty gave me you. My loneliness made me ready to accept love when it came. Emily's death, as terrible as it was, taught me to value what I have while I have it. Do you think she'd approve of all this? Nathan looked at Emily's grave, thinking about the woman who'd believed in him when he was nobody. I think she'd be proud. This is exactly what she wanted, a family, a community, people helping each other instead of just surviving alone. Maggie leaned her head against his shoulder. When I die, bury me here beside you and Emily. I want us all together. Don't talk about dying. You've got decades left. I know, but when it happens eventually, that's where I belong. Part of this land, this legacy, this family. Nathan kissed her forehead. Deal. Though I plan to die first, just so I don't have to live without you. Too bad. I'm younger. Statistically, you're dying first regardless of your plans. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the valley like a blessing. Below them, their children chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. The ranch house glowed with lamplight windows bright against the mountain darkness. In town, the school bell rang, marking 8 o'clock. Another day ending, another night beginning. This was the life Richard Ashford had tried to steal, the future he'd attempted to murder. Instead, his cruelty had forged something stronger than he'd ever built with all his money and corruption. A true family, a real community, a legacy that would outlive everyone on this hill, carried forward by children and grandchildren, and all the people whose lives intersected with the Stone family's generosity. Nathan stood, helping Maggie to her feet. Come on, Mrs. Stone, let's get these children to bed. 5 more minutes, Henry pleaded. I want to count more stars. You can count stars from your bedroom window, Maggie said firmly. It's past your bedtime. The family descended the hill together, Nathan carrying Thomas, Maggie holding Sarah, Henry, and Emily walking hand in hand. Behind them, 2 graves stood watch over the valley. Emily Stone and her unnamed child resting in the earth that generations of Stones would tend and love and defend. This was more than a ranch, more than 800 acres in Montana Territory. This was home. This was legacy. This was what happened when 2 wounded people chose to heal together instead of surrendering to bitterness. The story that began with a family's cruel scheme and a lonely man's desperate hope had become something neither could have imagined. Not a tragedy, despite all the violence and loss. Not even just a survival story, though they'd survived impossible odds. It was a love story. The kind built not on easy romance but on shared struggle, on choosing each other every day, on building something bigger than 2 people. The kind of love that changed landscapes and created communities and gave children the foundation to become better than their parents. The kind of love worth fighting for. The stars wheeled overhead as the Stone family entered their home, shutting the door against mountain night. Inside, laughter and warmth. Outside, the valley they'd saved and nurtured and transformed into something beautiful. Tomorrow they'd wake and do it again. Work the land, teach the children, serve the community, build the legacy one day at a time. But tonight they rested together, safe and loved and grateful for second chances that became first choices. The mountain man had found everything he'd ever wanted in the woman her family sent as a joke. And together they'd built something that would outlast them both. A home, a family, a future. Everything that mattered.